Let's paint a picture of a dark and nasty night. I'd say this is pretty nasty. It's raining and you've been IMC all the way. You fly a perfect approach and break out at minimums with the runway in sight. But you're not done yet. You still need to descend visually to the runway and then sort through a confusing collection of lights and runways as you taxi to the ramp. Fortunately, you have help. To assist you in the visual portion of your descent, you can often rely on a VASI, which, as you remember, stands for Visual Approach Slope Indicator. You've probably seen more than one type of VASI at various airports. And because they're so helpful at the end of an IFR approach, let's review how the different systems work. First, let's look at the most common version, the basic 2-bar VASI. You may see 1 to 3 light units in each bar or row. These rows have 2 lights each, and they can be on one or both sides of the runway. The more lights, the easier it is to see. If the lights are on only one side, they're usually on the left. And as you know, when you're on glide path with a 2-bar VASI, the far light is red and the near light is white. Remember the saying, red over white, you're all right. But if instead you see both bars red, then recite red over red, you're dead because you're low, below the visual glide path. Anytime you are below a VASI, just level off momentarily to intercept the VASI glide path and then resume your descent at a normal rate. And finally, if you see both lights as white, think white over white, you're out of sight. That means you're high, you're above the glide path. You need to descend to get on the visual glide path. But don't get aggressive on your rate of descent. You're too close to the ground to have a high rate of descent. If you're too high to descend safely for a normal landing, just make a go-round and circle, or execute a missed approach if the weather is below circling minimums. Now, at night with good visibility, you can see VASI lights out to 20 miles or more, but the VASI gives you no obstruction clearance guarantees that far out. A VASI glide path provides safe obstruction clearance only within 4 miles of the runway threshold and for 10 degrees on either side of the center line. So use the published minimum altitudes for the approach until you get within that protected VASI area, especially at night. The normal VASI glide path is set at 3 degrees unless a higher angle is necessary for obstruction clearance. Now, here's an example of a 3-bar VASI. It's exactly like a 2-bar VASI, except there are 2 glide paths, a lower one using the near and middle light bars, and an upper one using the middle and far light bars. If you fly the upper glide path, you use the far 2 sets of lights. And when you're on that glide path, you'll see red over white over white. When you're on the lower glide path, you use the first 2 bars. And as usual, you'll see red over white. But looking at the whole picture, it's really red over white. Now you might ask, who would want to fly the upper glide path? Well, the folks who fly high cockpit or long-bodied airplanes like the Boeing 747 would. When you're in the cockpit of a plane like that on approach, because it's so long, the nose of the airplane, including the cockpit, is way up here and the tail is way down here. You might be right on the glide path with the cockpit, but what's the tail doing? It's way down there dragging on the ground. So if you're in a high cockpit or long-bodied jet like that, you would use the upper glide path, so you'd have more clearance over the runway threshold. The 3-bar VASI makes glide paths, just like the 2-bar VASI. The lower glide path, the one you'll use, is normally set at a 3-degree angle. The upper glide path, intended for use only by high cockpit or long-bodied aircraft, is normally a 1/4 degree steeper. So if you're above both glide paths, all 3 bars are white. White over white over white, you're really out of sight. Red is your wake-up call on all VASI-type systems. If every light is red, you're low and you need to do something about it. Many airports now have what is called a PAPI, or Precision Approach Path Indicator. A PAPI consists of 4 lights, normally on the left side of the runway. If you're exactly on the glide path, the 2 lights on the right are red, and the 2 on the left are white. If you're low, you'll see all red lights, and if you're high, you'll see all white lights. Sound familiar so far? But the advantage of the PAPI is that it has more precision than the VASI. It can tell you if you're slightly low or slightly high. If you're slightly low, the 3 lights on the right will be red. And if you're slightly high, the 3 lights on the left will be white. Still, another type of approach path indicator is the pulsating visual approach slope indicator, or pulsating VASI. You probably won't see these too often, however, they do show up by a runway now and then. Again, the light colors are red and white, with white the okay color and red the bad news color. But this time you only see a single light, which will change as your glide path changes. If you're above the glide path, you see a pulsating white light. When you're on the glide path, you'll see a steady white light. The light changes to red when you go below the desired glide path. When you're just slightly below, it's steady. As you go further below, it starts to pulsate. The greater your distance from the desired path, either high or low, the more frantic the rate of pulsating. Since there is only a single point for the light source, you need to be careful not to confuse it with other lights near the end of the runway. For instance, be especially careful not to confuse these flashing runway end identification lights here on either side of this runway threshold with the pulsating VASI. A still rarer animal is the tricolored VASI, but there are a few out there. Like the P-VASI, this is a single light that changes color. So again, be careful not to confuse it with other lights near the runway. As the name implies, this one involves 3 light colors, your old friends from the traffic light, green, red, and amber. If you're right on glide path, you'll see green. Of course, if you're low, you'll see red. And in this case, if you're high, the light will be amber. A problem with the system that may account for its rarity is that when dropping down out of a green indication to a red, there is a momentary hint of amber. So when you are starting to get low on the glide path using the tricolored VASI, you first get a momentary indication that you're going high. If you use a tricolored VASI a lot, you can immediately sense a false indication. But if you're only a casual user, it can be confusing. Make sure during your approach self-briefing that you check which VASI system you'll see. Armed with that information, you'll be ready to properly interpret the system and make a stable descent to touchdown. Okay, your approach and landing are complete. And now it's time to taxi to the ramp. But it's dark, the visibility is really poor, and you don't know your way around this airport. If you wander around lost, you could easily taxi onto another runway right in front of another airplane, and that is not good. So the FAA has gone on a campaign of putting up better signage around airports to help prevent runway incursions. You're already familiar with the hold lines found on taxiways and approach areas. The holding position marker is 4 yellow lines, 2 solid and 2 dashed across the width of the taxiway. If the dashed lines are on the side towards your airplane as you approach the holding line, you may cross without stopping. For example, you may cross the holding lines on this taxiway when exiting the runway, since the dashed lines are on the runway side, the side you're coming from. But if the solid lines are on the side nearest you, at a towered airport, you must have ATC clearance to cross. At a non-towered airport, make sure there's no traffic conflict before you cross. You should hold short of the hold marker with none of your aircraft extending over it. Now, during periods when the weather is less than an 800-foot ceiling and or 2 miles visibility, taxiing aircraft are not allowed in what is called the ILS critical area without ATC clearance. The presence of an aircraft in the ILS critical area can cause fluctuations in the localizer and glide slope course signals. The ILS critical area markings are parallel yellow lines with cross ties extending across the taxiway. They look like a railroad track with some of the ties missing. When the ILS critical area is being protected, make sure no part of your airplane extends beyond these markings. Now, this is great, but these lines can be hard to see at night, and especially if there's rain or snow on the taxiway. So you'll usually also see lighted signs beside the taxiway that tell you where you are or what to do. Mandatory instruction signs like these with a red background and white lettering are used to denote the entrance to a runway or critical area or to areas where aircraft are prohibited. These signs mean you can't go any further unless ATC says it's okay to do so. They are located at the holding position on taxiways that intersect runways or on runways that intersect other runways. For instance, this sign is located where you would hold short of runway 10 right, 28 left. Now, it can be confusing to figure out which taxiway you're on and which one you're about to cross. If you see a black sign with yellow lettering and a yellow border, it's a taxiway location sign. It's telling you the name of the taxiway you're on at the moment, in this case, Alpha. You can use the phrase, black square, you're there, to help remember that. A yellow sign with black lettering is a direction sign. For example, if you're about to cross another taxiway, you'll see a yellow sign with black lettering and a black arrow telling you which direction that taxiway goes. So in this case, you're on taxiway Charlie, about to cross Hotel. And this sign tells you to turn left to get to the apron. As you can see, the saying, "it ain't over until it's over," certainly applies to an IFR flight. No matter how well you flew your approach, your IFR flight isn't successful until you've safely reached your parking spot on the ramp. And the FAA has given you lots of aids to help make that happen.